It says your post will no longer.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Because she's not free.
I love that kind of Steve blog.
Okay, thank you for indulging me. Okay, next time I'll pay for the upgrade now that it don't work. So yeah.
Is that it?
Yeah, so it's not, my thing's not working. But, okay, so we saw Twitter and blogs seem to be the main thing. Right. That was what we learned. And I also learned, like, I probably need to practice that a little bit more. And I need to pay for the upgrade so I can get more than 40 responses. So, okay, my claim right now is that to go from good to great, the difference between how great teachers are thinking about what they do versus good teachers is the increased teacher agency, the empathic reasoning for students, and the sort of ecological thinking of the classroom as a complex environment that has like a lot of like interconnections between things. So we can read blogs, right? We can go to global math department meetings. We can, you know, do all kinds of different things. And my question, like serious question, like I don't know the answer, is how do these things help us develop a sense of teacher agency? How do they help us develop empathic reasoning or ecological thinking? And I mean, I think about, you know, I have Fawn's blog up there, the Finding Ways. Woo! Yeah. Well, I just want to say, like, I love all of you. This is not me, like, it just seemed like in terms of these kinds of issues, like Finding Ways is really about teacher agency, like that name has in it. I'm going to find ways to solve these kinds of issues that come up in my classroom. Math mistakes, I have Michael Person's blog up there. That's like, what is the student thinking? Like getting behind, it's like developing empathy for like the student's reasoning. It seemed like a really good kind of issue there. And then Friends Davis, she's not here either, but her blog, like I feel like she is always looking at these intersections of culture and teaching and technology. She's a very kind of interconnected thinker. And so like I feel like I'm learning a lot personally from just reading blogs. But I also think that like these interactions that we have on Twitter, and Tina, I hope you don't mind, this was a conversation that you and I had a while ago, and like I see these features of like the, you know, of how teachers learn together happening through these kinds of interactions. So Tina asked this question a while ago, where she said, any thoughts on nixing the word minus from math class? Precise alternatives would include subtract, negative, and opposite. Now, that word nixing that Tina used, like, is a problem frame, and it's one with a history, right? Because she set up this wiki, this amazing wiki. When people say, "What is this you're doing?" This is one of the concrete examples I go to. This is amazing, and it was a collaborative effort to come up with this. Has everyone heard of Nixatrix? Okay, so for those of you who maybe haven't yet, first of all, you need to. But second of all, it's such a great idea because it's this language that we just use out of habit or out of history of like, you know, what's an example, Tina? What's one of the examples you have? You can't do that? Foil, right? Okay. So, and to kind of come up with alternative language that might get at the mathematics more deeply, right? So when Tina asked this question about, what about nixing the word minus from math class? So that was like a really interesting thing to me. And I was able to tell a story about something that I did in my classroom. Like, well, we used to talk about the 3 meanings of minus. We would have kids make sense of which one was appropriate. And you only have 140 characters on Twitter, so. So Tina says 3, and I say, yeah, the 3 you mentioned, opposite, negative, and subtraction. So it wasn't that I told kids they couldn't use minus, but I'd say, so which minus is that? So that they were aware that these things had different meanings in math class. And it was part of, as I say, it's part of how I was trying to get them to think about the relationship between math and everyday language. And I used an interpretive principle I said it presses on sense making and it gives them ways to think about the notation in different contexts. So that's like a value I have about something that needs to happen in my math classroom. So this, I don't know, Tina, if you remember this as an instance of learning, but for me it was an instance of learning and of sharing in a way that was instructional. And then Chris kind of came in, he's like, oh, can you give a tweet size, can you in a tweet size way give me the difference between the negative and opposite meaning for you? So that's the other thing that happens when teachers are talking together is these clarifying questions, right? And there are teacher cultures, like when teachers are talking together, where there's no room for that. Because we've got 40 minutes and we've got a lesson to plan, and don't bother me with your like follow-up clarification questions. And one of the nice things about Twitter and blogs is that you're on there when you have time to be on there. So even if like Chris asked this question, oh, that's true too.
What was it?
What I said,
No, what somebody just said.
or you don't. Anyway, so Chris asked a follow-up question, we were able to engage that. So I think of this as an instance of learning. So when I think about, like, if I imagine a really great PLC, and if I imagine, like, really this best kind of greatest hits of math Twitter MIT boss, like, how do these two kinds of situations allow for these kind of good to great things to happen in the teacher interactions? Even in a great PLC, in terms of kind of coming up with shared problem frames that might push us towards teacher agency, even in like the best groups I've studied, you kind of are stuck with who's in the room, right? And sometimes that's awesome and you're so excited. This is a great year of teaching. I've got the best PLC. But in MintBoss, we can kind of gravitate to our people, like people who we like to talk to and people who are more like-minded. I mean, maybe that's partly that I don't have 10,000 followers that I can do that. I mean, I don't know how some of you all who have like the 10K plus, like that's, you probably are in your own stratosphere. But I can like have these conversations with people who I find interesting to talk to. Now, I do find that, I don't know what you guys are finding in your research, but it seems like a lot of those conversations are resource sharing. I mean, even your story, Judy, was about like, oh my gosh, making up problems gets really old. And here's like this incredible resource and trove on these blogs of problems. And I think that there's a lot of resource sharing that goes on, but I think that there's a deeper thing that goes on too, and I think, you know, like the Nix to Tricks is an example of that. How about rich representations that really kind of develop empathic reasoning? Well, here's where I think PLCs have a little bit of an edge, like real life PLCs, because you all know your context, and you all kind of know like your student population and who your students are, the communities that they come from. I find that some of that breaks down a little bit in MIT-boss conversations. Like, I've had conversations with people where they're saying, oh, I do this and this and this. I'm like, you do? Like, how do you do that? How do you get kids to do that? And then it turns out they teach in a setting that's really, really different than any place I've ever worked. And I go, oh, okay. So, like, it's that piece, I think, the student empathy piece. I think math mistakes is a good example of how you can do some perspective taking of like how do kids make sense of these mathematical ideas. But I think there's some like real nuance about who kids are and the communities they come from that's harder to communicate on MIT-boss. The interpretive principles, the same thing, like your real life PLC if you have one, and they're nice. Like you're working in the same environment, you're working in the same policy environment. One of the things that's super weird about the US is the way NCLB has gone down in Texas is not the same as it's gone down in New York. It's not the same as it's gone down in California, let alone all the other states. And we've got Canadians here too, right? And you don't even have so like those pressures are really, really different in different places, and the policies and stuff and the resources that we have. So when you're working with your colleagues in a great PLC, you're working from like a similar set of conditions, whereas we're not. But in MIT-boss, but I do think in MIT-boss, like I said, because you're gravitating toward your people, you can share like interpretive principles. Like if I say I need to find a rich problem because I'm having this problem of some kids finishing first, I know where I could go in this room and people will know what I'm talking about, right? And share that kind of, that premise, that way of looking at the world. Oops, I forgot to press forward. So I think that these are kind of the differences. What advice do I have? Well, join us. Because resource sharing is a really, really important part of what I think people get out of participating in Twitter and blogs, add what you have, add your resources. Post a blog, even if you post twice, just post it, because it makes it retrievable down the line. I think the conversations that seem to be the most fruitful are the ones that push you on your thinking. There's always a danger, we know this about social media, the whole silo effect, right? That we can just kind of get really comfortable talking to our people, which is awesome, especially if you don't have a lot of your people in your school, because, oh my gosh, it's a breath of fresh air, you know what I mean, you care about the same things. But there also needs to be some pushing, otherwise we can become complacent. But I think it needs to be balanced because it's really, really hard to communicate about our school, our students, to develop that ecological thinking, that empathic reasoning in ways that might be more culturally specific, that might be more about our particular policy environment. So there needs to be some way, if you want to go from good to great, to grow your understanding of your own students and setting. And then that little like bundled knot of students, math, and instruction, like that has got to be where your focus is if I were giving you advice. So if someone just tells you, I do this and it works, like really think about how would that work when I'm teaching proportional reasoning? How would it work if I was teaching about quadratics? You know, these different topics, like all these different structures we hear about, they operate differently in different contexts. We need to think about how students experience these different topics of mathematics too. I mean, one of the things that the great group of teachers that I analyzed, they were totally clear on, and I'm sure you all know this too, if it has a fraction in it, right, kids are going to freak out, right? So this means you never do fractions, but you got to know that that's part of the deal. And like, how are you going to set it up with kids? Are you going to talk them through their fraction anxiety? Are you going to be like, one time this teacher's like, I don't even call it a fraction. I call it rise over run. And then they're good, you know? So like, right? So like that's kind of in that little intersection between students, math, and topic. And anyway, so those are my ideas. I would love to have a conversation with the remaining time, and I thank you for inviting me. Thank you for listening to me, and I look forward to a lot of continued conversations both now and in the future.